Hebrews chapter 2. So we've seen that the letter of Hebrews was written to folk who were discouraged. They faced opposition and difficulty of one sort or another. We get glimpses of that as you read through the letter. And they weren't just feeling a little bit low. It wasn't like you and me on a Sunday morning when sometimes you're not really quite feeling up to it, but, I'm fine. They're actually questioning whether really it was worthwhile hanging on to their faith, or whether going back on it wasn't such a bad idea after all. And we've seen that the writer is encouraging these folk to stay in the race. So we saw last time that Hebrews opens with a bang. It's God's final word, says the writer. Not some pick and mix, but God's final word, the word that ends everything else. So we saw it was God's final word in that it ends and it sums up and it fulfills the long history of the prophets. So he opens saying, in the past, God spoke to us, to our ancestors, through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us through his Son. Peter says in 2 Peter, the prophets looked forward and they searched intently, trying to find out what exactly was the Spirit of God pointing them to as he spoke of the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. They earnestly looked to try and find out. Yet now, says the writer, it's all fulfilled. It's all on open display. God has spoken to us by his Son. We also saw it's God's final word because Jesus is the ultimate revelation of God. The writer says that God's essence is so stamped on him, it's so etched into his character, it's so much part of who he is, that to see him is to see God. We also saw that it's God's final word because Jesus has the authority to conclude all argument. So the one who walked among us, according to the writer, is the one who upholds the entire cosmos. And it's God's final word because Jesus has now sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. It's finished. It's a finished work. It's done. It's complete. God has nothing further to add. And we saw this wasn't just a message delivered by prophets or even angels, but it was enacted in person. And so as Jesus comes, heaven holds its breath as the angels look on in worship. We saw that Jesus enacts God's plan, his final word, as he brings his spotless life and offers it as a sacrifice at the cross. And we saw that what he achieved at the cross is so much more than just your personal forgiveness and mine. Everything that fell under the curse through Adam is now redeemed through the cross. And so the writer quotes from the Old Testament to show that this Jesus will one day roll up the entire everything and restore everything to how it should be. You see, he says, he will roll them up like a robe, like a garment, they will be changed. The entire creation will be renewed and restored. And we saw at the centre of it all, the centre of all that God was doing is you, if you're a Christian. He says at the end of chapter 1, are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? These angels that were causing such confusion, he said, are sent to serve you, he says. You mustn't judge God by circumstances. He says, at the centre of his purpose, the reason for his final word, the object of his love, the reason his Son came is you, he says. And we saw the writer doesn't want to leave it there, but he wants to press home his point. And so we have the first of his many warnings, which he describes drifting. If we ignore God's final word, he says, literally, if we don't take care of it, how shall we escape? We must therefore pay the most careful attention, therefore, says the writer. So if you're like me, then you'd be good at avoiding encouragement. I can be very perverse when it comes to encouragement, finding reasons why it can't quite be as good as you say in my case. And the phrase that applies is, yes, but. Yes, but. It's okay. So I'm at the centre of all of God's purposes, yes. But I feel worthless at times. I feel unloved. In fact, at times I feel abandoned. Where is God? Where was God? And okay, so Jesus enacts God's final word. God himself has walked amongst us. To see him is to see God. Yes, but life is tough. Life's tough. Christians are despised and marginalised. Churches are small. Our church is small. How do you equate the two? What's going on? What's God doing? If God has given his final word, at times it doesn't seem to have had much effect. And okay, so the cross changes everything. Even the cosmos itself is redeemed from the curse of the fall. Everything changes post-cross. Yes, but I look around and everything's the same. Chaos and frustration and pain and suffering and conflict and injustice just seem to continue on and on. Many of the early writers would have been Jewish. Probably not all of them. People tend to think it's written to Jews, but that's maybe not true. But a lot of them would have been Jewish. And for them, a lot of the yes but probably revolved around comparisons with their past. So you think of Moses and the Exodus, powerfully bringing the people out of Egypt through the Red Sea. Or Joshua, taking the people into the promised land, conquering powerful nations and taking it over for the people of God. Or the priesthood and the sacrifices and all those visual and powerful symbols of God's love and presence. And the opposing temple. And now they're meeting in small house churches. They're marginalised, they're irrelevant. They're classed as a sect by family and friends. They worship a saviour they can't see, and they're told by all their friends and family that he is just a mistaken view that they've picked up as part of their sect. Maybe this morning you have your own set of the yes buts. You've come here with discouragement of one sort or another. Well, the writer would say to you and to me, fix your eyes on Jesus. Stay in the race, keep pressing on, and fix your eyes on Jesus. So again, we ask the question, how does that work? How does that actually work? It's okay to give the pat answer when everything's going well. But when they're not, when we're finding it's hard going, how does that really work? Well, the writer of Hebrews is going to continue to tell us here in chapter 2. Got 3 points, so we're on safe ground. Well, sort of safe ground anyway. And the first thing he tells us, is the pioneer of a new humanity. And we're looking here at verses 5 to 10. So our problem very often is that we equate God's love and his purposes with what we see in our experience of life now. But we have to step back from that at times and recognise that God's purposes are based on a new humanity and a new world order and a complete restoration of everything that went out of kilter at the fall. And he's doing it through our pioneer. So, for example, in verse 10, it says, in bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. A pioneer of our salvation. What does that mean? Look at verses 5 to 9. Now, a section in there that's quoting from Psalm 8 can be a bit confusing at times. I don't know if you've read through it at times, particularly if you've used the older NIV translation or one of the other older translations. You know, when it says him, for example, who's it referring to? When it says Son of Man, is that us or is that Jesus? And sometimes trying to understand who the him refers to means we get in a bit of a muddle and we just move on to other parts of the book that are more readily accessible. And I guess we probably do that quite a lot with the book of Hebrews. Bits that are very easy to understand and we latch onto, and other bits that perhaps can be a little bit shadowy. Well, the quote is from Psalm 8. And Psalm 8 describes God's original plan for humanity, with mankind having dominion over all of God's creation. And so the quote refers to you and to me, including the reference to the Son of Man. It simply means us as humans, describes our place in God's world, and is very different to the prevailing view that you will hear from society today. So the quote from Psalm 8 says that you and I are unique in God's creation. We were made in God's image, and so the psalmist says that we're crowned with glory and honour as we reflect God's image. You and I live in God's world. You bear his image as the crowning point of his creation. And we rule the creation as those who bear his image. It says you put everything under his feet. It stresses it again. He left nothing that is not under our feet. So you and I have huge dignity in God's world. We're not just some chance, random effect of some sort of evolutionary process. Oh, yes, but you say, but. Haven't you ever watched the news? Don't you ever look out beyond your fantasy world? Where is this having all things under his feet? Look around you. I look out and see wildfires, storms and flooding and disease and disaster and famine and poverty and conflict and injustice. And you tell me this is what we are in God's world, having all things under our feet? Really? Really? The second half of verse 8 has a masterful understatement that kind of picks it up. It says, yet at present, we don't see everything subject to them. We don't see it. In other words, we're not in that perfect world that we were made for, and that perfect world that we dream of as we long for an absence of crying and pain and injustice. We lost that in Eden. You remember as Adam is thrown out of the garden, and humanity remains in a total mess. In so many ways, we're not the custodians of the perfect world that we were designed to be. Instead, we're struggling to survive in a fallen world. We don't see everything subject to us as the pinnacle of God's creation. But, says the writer, but we do see Jesus, the pioneer, the representative man, the one who ushers in a new humanity that will rule over a perfect world. He says we do see Jesus now crowned with glory and honour. He is our representative. He's our pioneer. He is the one who guarantees what is to come. Now, but not yet. And the problem with these folk is they saw the now and the difficulties, and they'd forgotten the not yet. How did Jesus become our pioneer? Verse 10 tells us that it was through suffering. It says that God should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. We're going to follow him. He's our pioneer. He has made the way possible. But the writer clearly hints that we'll follow him first through the path of suffering, the cross before the crown. And it's a theme he'll return to many times in the letter. And so the take-home message: it's easy to see everything through the eyes of discouragement. It's easy to see everything through the lens of circumstances. It's so easy to judge God's intentions towards us by our feelings and how we feel at this moment in time. But instead, we need to see life now through the eyes of faith. To fix your eyes on Jesus. Or he says in chapter 3 and verse 1, fix your thoughts on Jesus. Judge God's love for you by the cross and not by what he brings in your life now. So the pioneer of a new humanity. But secondly, you see here, this pioneer comes alongside us. The pioneer who comes alongside us, and we're looking at verses 11 to 14. Oh, yes, you say, and I might say, that's all very well, but you don't understand what I'm going through now. And that's true. I don't know. I don't know what you brought with you. I don't know what you'll face to the week that comes. But I do know someone who does. We've all got heroes in life. Hebrews 11 has that the catalogue of the heroes of faith. And we all love to refer to what it says in the beginning of chapter 12, being surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. But what does that mean when push comes to shove, when we're up against it? Sometimes it can all just seem a bit distant. After all, they're figures of history. How do they help me now? Well, the writer of Hebrews wants us to know that Jesus is not just a figure of history. He's not just a trailblazer who left us an inspiring path to follow and is now remote and looking on. And sometimes we can get that impression. And sometimes some Christians think like that. Jesus has done his bit. It's up to you now. Don't mess up. Jesus has done everything that you need, but it's now your responsibility. But that's not biblical. That's not what the Bible says at all. What it says is that he came alongside us as he walked this earth as one of us, and he continues to come alongside us. Exalted, yes, but alongside us at the same time. So you see, for example, in verse 11, both those who make people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. He is here this morning as your elder brother. He calls you his brother, his sister. He comes alongside you. It's interesting. Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. Why would he be ashamed? Well, have a look at yourself. Have a look around. In a sense, it would be easy to ask the question, why wouldn't he be ashamed? Fallen, broken, sinful, and yet he comes alongside us this morning. There's a couple of interesting sort of what feels like throwaway comments, but actually quite significant. Verse 5, it says, it's not to angels that he has subjected the world to come. And again in verse 16, he says, for surely it's not angels he helps. Not angels. In other words, not the perfect, not those who've got it all together, not those who serve God wholeheartedly and unfalteringly. It's not those who've got nothing to be ashamed of, those who've never had doubts or fears of one sort or another. But he says he helps Abraham's descendants. You think of that line of descendants and you think of us, flawed and broken, those who get it wrong, those who mess up, those with all sorts of mixed motives. And yet, like Abraham, the man of faith, looking to Christ in faith and trusting in him. People like you and me. Sometimes the devil whispers in your ear that God can't really love you. Sometimes he tells you that God's abandoned you and really you need to give up, that God must be ashamed of you. The devil may say that, but it says explicitly here, Jesus is not ashamed to call them his brothers. He is not ashamed. Not ashamed to call you his brother, his sister. Not ashamed to come alongside you. Not ashamed to come alongside you as you are, where you are, in your situation right now. And the writer goes on to start the theme of Jesus' ability to sympathize. So in verse 18 it says, because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. You could simply paraphrase that by saying, he gets it. He gets it. So as you go through the ups and the downs of life, as you go through the sadnesses, as you go through the tragedies, the failures, the twists and the turns, the setbacks, he's with you in it and he gets it. It's an interesting comment of verse 10. He says, in bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitted that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. How did he make Jesus perfect? What does that mean? I mean, wasn't Jesus perfect already? Was there some flaw in his character? Well, it doesn't mean that at all. When he says perfect, he means perfect in terms of the role that he fulfills. He had to become one of us in order that he could take our place and die in our place. And he had to suffer in order that he would know and understand what you and I go through. So he's perfect in the sense that there is nothing that he cannot understand or sympathize with. So what is it you're struggling with that you think Jesus wouldn't know about? Do you have aches and pains in your body? Well, he had his body racked with pain on the cross. Have you had someone close to you whose life was tragically cut short? Jesus had his own life brutally taken in the prime of his life. Have you been hurt by someone's words, crushed by what they've said? So was Jesus, as Peter denies him with oaths and as Judas, his friend, betrays him. Have you been badly let down by those who should know better? Well, so was Jesus as disciples left him and fled. Have you been treated unfairly? Have you been left on your own? Have you blamed for someone else's shortcomings? So was Jesus. He endured the mock trial, fabricated evidence, planted witnesses, unfair accusations, corrupt trial judges, beatings, mocking, humiliation, and ultimately the cross. See, he is perfect because there is nothing now that he cannot understand or sympathize with. So don't judge God through circumstances. He has it all in his hands and he will take you through the difficult times. More than that, he will walk alongside you through every up and every down that he sees fit to bring into your life. So the pioneer of a new humanity who comes alongside us, but thirdly, the pioneer who breaks the power of death. The pioneer who breaks the power of death. Yes, but, you might say, plenty of people sympathise, but they can't actually do anything. They can't do anything about my situation, and I need to know, what do I do? Fine words are just that. They're just words and no more. The writer stresses here that Jesus has dealt with the very crux of the matter. It's in verse 14. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. You see, our yes but is really just saying that we realise we shouldn't be like this. There's an inbuilt sense that the world shouldn't be like this. There's an inbuilt sense that we were made for more. And we long for the perfection that we lost in Eden. Lost in Eden. And yet the reality is heartache and conflict and trouble and sadness and ultimately death. Verse 14. He breaks the power of him who holds the power of death. You see, in order to create this new humanity that is coming, he must first break the curse, and in particular the power of death. And in his cross and resurrection, Jesus triumphs over the grave. See, death is the ultimate for the curse. As Adam is thrown out of Eden, the perfect world is no more. Everything is cursed, and death becomes the norm for life. And you remember from Genesis' account that the way back to Eden was guarded. So however hard we try, however much we might want to, we are shut out of Eden. The perfect world is no more. Immortality and perfection are no longer there. We cannot attain them. Diets, anti-aging creams, pills, you can't stop the process of dying. And people fear what's to come. You know, the C word, dementia. Some we saw on television rejoicing over the assisted assisted dying bill and the first vote, because it will give them the power to end their lives if they get cancer. It may just be me, but it seems to sum up verse 15, people being held in slavery through their fear of death. See, death, it casts a shadow over life. Sometimes we sense its feel on our collar. It has a hold on us. We try and shut it out, but it's always there as the backdrop to life. But death is not the end. Death is not just physical. So what lies beyond? We fear the unknown, and so fear becomes part and parcel of life as we know it. It's life in the fall. It's what we inherit in Adam. But the cross destroyed the curse. The cross dealt with the crux of the matter. And through the message of the cross, lives are set free. And we have no more to fear as Jesus sets us free. A few weeks ago, we looked at John 16. And we saw there Jesus promised to us, his cast iron promise to you and to me this morning, in this world you will have trouble. You have to take his word and believe it. But he goes on to say, take heart, I have overcome the world. And you remember that word overcome, we said was the Greek word for victory. Here is Jesus, the victor over sin and death and hell through his cross and resurrection. So the writer says, let us fix our thoughts on Jesus. Chapter 3 and verse 1. Therefore, holy brothers and sisters who share in the heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus. In other words, look away from yourself and all that you are. Look away from your circumstances and trust in the finished work of Christ. The pioneer of a new humanity. One day we will rule alongside Jesus in the perfect world that we were intended for. We don't see that now, but we do see Jesus now crowned with glory and honour. He's gone before us as our pioneer. We follow, but all in his time. The pioneer who comes alongside us. We follow in Jesus' steps, the cross before the crown. But we're not alone. He's alongside us. And he is sufficient for every struggle, every tear, every frustration, every setback. And he delivers from death, not just someone with nice words, but someone who's dealt with the crux of the matter, the one who has broken the devil's hold, who frees us from the curse and the power of death, conqueror over sin and death and hell. And as we said last week, at the centre of it all, at the very centre of God's purposes, it's you, if you're a Christian. For surely, he says, it's not angels he helps, but the weak, the needy, the fallen, the messed up, the broken, the folk like you and me, if you trust in Christ.